Great. So we have a wonderful group of panelists joining us today. And so I would like to start by welcoming our moderator, Dr. Janis Cole. Janis is a certified deaf interpreter and received her PhD in interpreting from Gallaudet University. So Janis, you can come on screen. I am done for the day and you can take it away.
Kristen, thank you so much for that generous introduction and for the land acknowledgement, which was touching, and I think it's important to honor the land as well. Hello, everyone. I am very excited to be here. First, I want to just mention what you see on my face. I had surgery yesterday, so here it is, and you can then proceed to ignore it now that you know about it. And I'd like to now ask our panelists to join us on the screen. Great. It's great to have everyone here with us, and today I feel is an important discussion about what we're calling DASLs, D-A-S-L. You contribute greatly to what we do, and I'd like our audience to understand what the role is for a DASL. First of all, I will briefly introduce you. I'll begin with Anne Tomasetti. Anne is from New York, and she has been working as a DASL for many years, and she's known for her work in consulting as well. Next, we have Alexandria Wailes. Alexandria Wailes. Want to make sure her name is spelled clear. She's an actor, director, consultant, and has been in the theater world for some time. And we're thrilled to have the two of you here with us. Next, I see John McGinty. Hello, John. Was raised in Ohio, now lives in New Jersey, and has worked as a DASL on the technical side. Next, I have Monique Holt, who's a professor at Gallaudet University in the theater department and has also been involved in the theater world as a DASL. And she's a consultant. She lives in Washington, D.C., and we're pleased to have her with us. And next we have Xavier Sabio, who is in New York and is a proud New Yorker from Brooklyn. So he is also new to the field of working as a DASL. And I'm glad to have a variety of perspectives for our work, and I'm pleased to have everyone involved in this conversation. We've got questions to begin with, and the first question I will ask for the entire panel is, what is a DASL? Can you describe it, define it for us? And anyone? All right, I'm just going to pick Alexandria.
I knew I would be the first up. Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. Now, I'd like to briefly describe visually what I look like. I am a mixed skin tone woman with dark hair and a gray colored shirt. Behind me, there is a painting. It is an Aboriginal painting from Australia. And I have a sort of dark beige wall. Now, to answer your question as to what a DASL is, we have definitely witnessed a huge movement or impact, if you will, a spotlight that's happening now. And it's been happening over time. I may tap on you, Momo, to talk a little bit more about that evolution and talking about how we came to the acronym DASL, which is Director of Artistic, or sometimes American Sign Language. So that's DASL or Dazzle. Now, speaking from my perspective, my experiences, my personal journey, what I have seen thus far in terms of what a Dazzle does is really blend in a variety of different things and tasks, which is sometimes your dramaturgy of language and translation work. Sometimes it's looking at the authentic exploration and looking at the creative process with the team, and that includes the interpreters. For me, in terms of my background, I tend to also look at the spatial quality of movement and signing choices. And that's just something that I like to do in my work. But Momo, you may have a good expansion of that.
Anne, can you talk a bit about your background, please?
Hello, my name is Anne Tomasetti. I am a white woman, and for some reason, my lighting is having some issues. I look a little bit more paler than I normally do. My background is gray and it's lit. I have a white chair that I'm sitting on with a pillow, and it has eyes on it.
Thank you. John?
Hi there, I am John McGinty. This is my sign name. And the reason this is my sign name is because I wink a lot. So you might see me wink throughout the course of today. I am a white male with a blue polo shirt on, with the blue insignia on my chest to the left. Behind me is a background of a white background. I have dirty blonde hair that comes up to my ears. So thank you so much.
And Monique.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monique, but you can also call me Momo. I am an Asian woman with the short pixie haircut, blonde pixie haircut. I also have a black round frame glasses. I also have a boat neck black top. I have a light olive tan skin, and my background is white.
Thank you. And Zavier.
Hi there, my name is Zavier. I am from Brooklyn, and I am wearing a black t-shirt with a gold chain and a black hair, and it's a flat top hairstyle. My hair, that's how my hair is cut. My background consists of bricks. It's a reddish brownish bricks. And on the other side of that background, there are white and black stripes diagonally running across. I'm currently at a coffee shop.
Nice.
Nice place to be. And I am Janis Cole. I am white. I have dirty blonde hair, shoulder length. I'm wearing glasses. I have a Band-Aid across my face. And I have a grayish shirt with a blue background. And I'm seated in a chair. Thank you. And now to the question about Dazzle. Going back to our conversation with Alexandria, we've had many names for this position. It's changed over time. Does anybody want to discuss the evolution and, in fact, why that evolution of the name occurred? Yes, Monique.
Yes, this is Monique signing. Over the course of time, we have said that we originally had the name of signing coach or an ASL master, a variety of those names. In Washington, D.C., they often use the term signing master or sign master. On the West Coast, they use ASL master. And so as you can see, just based on the different coasts, there are different names. And so sometimes folks have said, well, SM, well, does SM mean stage manager? Because that's what we know that to be in the theater world, right? So we needed to decide, how do we have this conversation as a community to figure out how we can identify those who are the experts to discuss such backgrounds. And so the community decided, okay, let's talk about this. So we brainstormed some ideas and we ended up with the term DASL, which is also known as Dazzle. And the reason we decided that was because it was the Director of Artistic Sign Language, or ASL, and we did think, okay, well, it's not always American Sign Language, because there are certain languages that we work in, that we create, that we borrow from other nations, from others, signing from other communities. It's almost as if it's a VGC, a visual gesture communication. So we're adding a variety of signs and backgrounds. And so it's a variety of languages. And so it's an understanding and a variety of native and heritage usage that is incorporated into this work. And so we decided to incorporate all of that. And so we've actually changed it from American Sign Language to artistic. So that way we have more flexibility and there's more malleable of a concept to say, this is more than just ASL. And so we started that, maybe that was, I want to say, when was that? That was probably around 2006, 2007, around then. We started to coin that phrase, DASL. Some folks will say, no, we will still use sign master, but the roles are actually quite different. So for instance, if we're talking about sign coach, that's a different role than a DASL. And the reason is because a sign coach doesn't often help or assist with the translation. We allow that person to do the translation work, and we just actually allow the translation to be produced by the interpreter, and the sign coach just provides very minimal feedback to make sure that there's more maybe emphasis on an accent or emphasis on tone. And so they just give very minimal cleanup, if you will. And that's what that is, to polish up that translation. But DASL or Dazzle, like Alexandria already mentioned, this is more of a linguistic, phrasal language. Maybe they're a dramaturg, and so they provide a variety of a wholeness to that approach. And so it's as if you're doing 3 jobs in one, if you will. And so the consultant line can actually allow for a wide range of the involvement of preparing the text with the director, looking at the preliminary work and procedures. We have to do our research. Sometimes we don't always have, access to the information. Maybe we have to go into Italian Sign Language, and we have to contact folks there who use Italian Sign Language and contact them and say, thank you so much, we need that information. How do we sign that? And then now we have to then incorporate that into the script and then teach that to the actors or interpreters who may be using it. So that's not necessarily the same as somebody who's in the role of a signing coach. And so that's just one example of how that can be translated into how the names and roles have changed over the years.
Thank you. You've definitely helped us understand. Does anybody want to make additional comments? Yes, Zavier.
Yeah, I would agree with Alexandria and Momo in terms of what a dazzle is. At the end of the day, if you don't understand what it is in terms of the choices and those audiences, it's important. If you don't understand, then the audience will likely not understand. And so you really have to work in terms of translation, looking at the linguistics, the lighting, and making sure that the audience will have the same sense and have that equal access to the story. And so looking at artistic in the DASL part, I think that I would agree with that. And it really is important to ensure that the audience is fully understanding and has access to that work and that piece. And like you said, I agree. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with American Sign Language, but we're not always working within the same language, and it incorporates different languages. So recently, I worked on a performance last year. It was a play, and the play was called A Soldier's Play. And we wanted to make sure that the interpreters really felt like they were involved in the era, that time period of the 1940s, and incorporating Black culture and looking at how sign language may have been used by Black men during that time period. And we really want to make sure that the audience had that similar experience of being in that time era. And so you're really looking at not just the language, but also looking at the time and the culture and the linguistics of it to make it a whole piece.
Yes, John.
And I agree with that, because we are looking at tying everyone's demographic and background. We want to acknowledge the history, right? We want to acknowledge the history. What was the genesis, the original meaning of what did that sign look like at that time, back in that time of history, that period, that phrase? That could be a 30-page dissertation just on that phrase alone. And so we really need to look at everything incorporated into the role, because years later, we're going to look back and see the evolution, and that 30-page could become a 100-page dissertation, because we look at the human language and the evolution of how we're using language and the perceptions and the impact of those perceptions, and how we're bringing that to the audience and how we're bringing that within our work. And that is all incorporated into the work of a Dazzle. And so when you think about a Dazzle, if they had come, you said what, when was that? 2006? Was that right, Momo? Yep, around 2006. So that's 20 years later from now, what will that role then look like? Will the technology then be much heavier? Will there be more emphasis on that impact? Will there be more emphasis on the role of a Dazzle, right? So that's something to look forward to and something to consider in our discussion.
So I would say that New York has a lot of theater work. It's intense work for
yes,
deaf artists, but that may not be true nationwide or even globally. So do you think people are aware of the term Dazzle? Are they still using sign coach? Or how do you think we can make this impact for the concept be nationwide? Anne.
This is Anne. Do you mean specifically in New York or anywhere all over the world?
Well, I think that Dazzle is a term that is being bandied about here, but do people everywhere know this term yet, or are they still using sign coach? I don't think that Dazzle has really spread nationwide. So what would you say, Monique?
This is Momo speaking. Yeah, so when we accept a gig, if you will, when you work with a director who's on a show, and you're talking about production, by the way, not the interpreters, we're talking about in pre-production, work with the director, work with the creative team. They will see and they will be exposed to that term, and they'll say, hey, we want you to join our team. And that's how deaf people will say, oh, what are you doing? Well, what's your role in production? And you say, well, I'm in the role of a dazzle. So that's how we can actually disseminate that information, providing workshops. I was part of Boston University's workshop. They had invited me to provide 2 different workshops at the time. And I also did a little bit of work in California as well. And so we really have to spread the word in that way. And we also have to expose and use social media to also amplify and highlight our role, maybe doing different vlogs. People will be curious because these are potential jobs. These are potential opportunities, because folks will say, I don't want to act. I'm not really a director, but hey, I love language. And this is the perfect place for a dazzle. And other deaf people are not even aware that they could have this role and have this place, especially folks who have a linguistics background or ASL background. This is a chance for them to play with language. And so again, we really want to expose and really allow folks in theater to not just be limited to acting or directing, right? There's so many different parts that they can participate in.
Alexandria.
Yeah, this is Alexandria speaking. And I think you raised your hand earlier, but oh, okay. Yeah, so that was clarified. Momo answered it for you. Okay. So now thinking about how we spread the word, and in terms of looking at advocacy, and most of my work, if often it's self-advocacy. That's where it started, really advocating for myself. That's where it begun. And so the challenge is, if you see a production and you are seeing where the gaps are, what's lacking in that process, and you really need to invite people who can contribute creatively in that process in a meaningful way that will be supportive. And the theater may not know what they don't know. And so you really want to say, okay, do you have someone? If not, then I can recommend different people and be a little bit more assertive if I'm already involved in that production. And so thinking also about allyship as well, how we can be supportive for each other, how we can be allies in this. And if you're seeing, oh, you know what, this, someone needs more support, they need to be educated more, they need more lessons, then having that, knowing who to recommend and making those recommendations, I think overnight doesn't happen, but over the past 5 years, it's really grown exponentially. And I think since 2006, immediately after we really discussed the meaning of Dazzle and what that meant, it's grown a lot.
John.
I agree 1,000% what Alexandria just said, because within my own personal experience, I have switched a lot of hats from acting to a variety of other roles. As a dazzle, it's almost like an afterthought, right? Because as an actor, you get the job, and then the team's like, okay, great, we'll bring in an interpreter, and we've done our job in terms of access. But the truth is, we actually need a dazzle to participate in the production role, because we need to have deaf eyes in the work and their perspective. It's not only just for myself, who is an actor, but the interaction within the space is also important. When we think about the beginnings of any project or assignment, when you add Dazzle, it's so significant. We don't only need them for like a few days, but we actually need them for long term. But we actually need them to be able to be there from the beginning, because if you add them too close to the end of production, then you'll have to do a lot of cleanup, if you will. You may have to make some adjustments in the work. And so it's important to include the Dazzle and any other additional accommodations at the beginning of any production.
Now I'd like to address qualifications for DASLs. It's very interesting. I can see each of you here, and you all have backgrounds in the theater. You all have knowledge of theater, and you're working as DASLs. Is that background mandatory? What would you say the qualifications for a DASL would be? Anne?
This is Anne. Yeah, I think we're all very lucky because we do have a unique background. We love theater, we're actors, we love linguistics, we love language, we love reading. Overall, we like how the piece comes together. And it's a wonderful qualification to have as a DASL. If we have all of those boxes checked, if you notice, there's a variety of talent out there, and it's all beneficial. And we have all very different qualifications. For example, someone may be very talented with looking at the framework of cinema and theater, but as far as ASL linguistics and studying what that consists of, if you love it so much, just like you love English, the language of English, and you're automatically translating that, and that's a particular skill to have. And then that becomes a DASL who embodies all of that. And there's also some deaf DASLs who have an interpreting background already. So someone like a CDI, a certified deaf interpreter, someone who has already worked within that field, they have that experience of working as an interpreter. They know what it takes to analyze a script, how to communicate and convey the message, and they understand how the whole piece has to come together. And they embody that just as a DASL themselves. And that's also a wonderful skill to have. A lot of us, we have different layers. We have different skills, different talents. I mean, sometimes there's a DASL who has no background in theater. You can still become a DASL. Maybe you'll have more of an advisor role because we need deaf eyes just to verify, to check, to provide feedback, to say, hey, you know what, I understood what you did. Or, you know what, maybe we need to clean this up. We need to polish that. But just having deaf eyes present to provide feedback and to just look out on the interpretation and make sure that it's authentically conveyed is crucial.
Yes, and Zavier.
Yes, this is Zavier speaking. Yeah, I think that's the beauty of being a DASL. There is no set specification or qualifications that you need. You can be qualified for something, but I may not be qualified, and vice versa, depending on the context of the production or the play or the show. And so I think that in itself is a gift because we all bring something to the table, and that's really just the beauty of what it means to be a DASL.
Monique.
I also would like to tag on to what Anne just mentioned, if I may. I think it's interesting because I do see two different set of ideas. One, you could have a background maybe in linguistics, which would certainly benefit you. You could certainly be bilingual in English and ASL. There is certainly a need for that. On the other hand, and that's fine, but it's also okay if you don't have that background as well. I'm of course not saying that you wouldn't need to have that or that's not necessary, but don't limit yourself. You need a team no matter what. Say for instance, if I'm inept at something or a concept, I wouldn't mind having another person in the room to give me a variety of choices. That's what a team provides, to have a team or community. Don't work alone or in silos, work in a team. That's why we believe in collaborative work. That's why we believe the creativity could be stronger and the show can be enjoyable for all deaf and hard of hearing patrons. I mean, that's the whole point, right? We want to make sure that those are two different pools of thought and opportunities, but you can be there for production. You can be there working with interpreters. I mean, those are two very different paths, and both are necessary. And I do agree with what John also mentioned earlier about the fact when you work in theater and you need a support system, that's something we need to discuss in pre-production, right? We need to discuss that in the budget. I mean, we need to discuss that early on because it needs to be built in the budget so that we have it in the budget line to pull in people and invite folks from the community to be able to provide a cohesive and coherent production. And so when we're doing when we're considering playwrights or thinking about how we need to make certain adjustments, how does a person sign on stage? What does that look like? What's the goal? How can we have a hearing person sign with a deaf person? What is that relationship? What does that look like? Now, as a DASL, we would be able to analyze that together. What is the most appropriate approach? If you bring in a DASL at the end or close to the end of production, what often ends up happening is that there is judgment. There really is a sense of, oh, another accommodation we have to provide for this person who needs accommodations. You need to provide a DASL early on so that everyone can see that partnership and show respect and see and honor that work and see how that's important, because there's equity there, right? And it's important to have that kind of conversation early on.
Thank you so much. John.
Yes, this is John. I also want to talk about the qualifications aspect and what's involved. Again, you're right. This is really open to interpretation because there are so many things incorporated into this role. One thing that does come to mind for myself is when COVID impacted all of our lives. I mean, this impacted production. And as you mentioned, a lot of productions are happening on Zoom, interpretations happening on Zoom. That means the in-person of having a DASL, which tends to be in person, and then to shift that into a digital space, that does require a sense of technology and access to that. And speaking for myself, when I worked as a DASL on Zoom, to me, that means I'm focusing on not just translation and consulting, but as well as the technical aspect of the work to make sure the framing is appropriate, the costume is appropriate, the background. That is quite a lot. And later on, I recently discovered is that there's also two pools of thought here where a DASL can focus mainly on language, as mentioned, translation, meaning, and analyzing it. And then there's another aspect of the technical aspects. What is the technical part? So there are two different roles. There are two separate opportunities that a DASL could do. And that helps to actually minimize the pre-production, because if you focus less maybe on language, that could actually allow for more attention on the technical aspect, because the technical aspect is really is not something that we often think about in the role of a DASL. So we really do need to consider what the future will look like, because language itself is going to grow and evolve and change. So how do we make sure that the work that we are doing is present and flows in a collaborative way, and we believe where it's significant, and to allow for the production to be as good as it can be for everyone involved?
So for our general audience, I want to help everyone understand that a DASL has a great many responsibilities. You've enumerated them, including technical. So then, who's responsible for hiring the interpreter? What does that look like? How do you select a team? How do you make these decisions? Are you as a DASL responsible for bringing in the team, or is the sign master responsible for selecting interpreters? How does that work? Who am I going to choose? Yes.
Oh, sorry, this is John signing.
John.
Sorry. If I could, I'd like to give an example. I was doing a play with Signature Theater in New York here, and it was on Zoom. There's one interpreting agency who we worked with, and I was part of
hands-on.
Thank you. And so this person, had the burden of choosing interpreters, selecting interpreters to provide the story, if you will. And so there were, in terms of preference for interpreters and preferred style for that actor, and that's fine. And within that process, it seems to be, making sure we watch the work of the interpreter. Do we understand reading the dialogue, reading the text? And so the technical person is responsible to make sure that the signing is in frame. And what I loved was, and I'll give this name, April Jackson. Some of you may know her. She was signing heaven up here. And if you sign heaven up here, that means you're not in frame, as you can see. Like when you sign baby, you can see parts of my hand are not completely in the frame. And so how do we shift and how do we adjust that from a technical aspect to make sure that the signing is in the frame? So that means you have to move whatever device you're on a little bit further away from you, as well as the background. Some backgrounds have a little bit of a background.
Wrinkles and some wrinkles. And we
Yes.
wanted there to be consistency with in terms of making sure that it fits the value of the production and what it is that they're going for. And so we want to ensure that we're checking in with the Dazzle in terms of the linguistics and partnering with the technical advisor and ensuring, okay, so hey, let's look at if I received as the technical advisor any questions about linguistics, I would refer it to April Jackson. And that's how we partner together, ensuring that we divided those roles but still work together at the same time.
And Monique.
Yes, this is Momo. One example too is looking at the Kennedy Center. We have what you call interpreter auditions. Now we already have the scene and we've already set up the scene.
And the season of the plays that have been set for the season are already in place. And so looking at, we have a strong musical, we have makeup, we have tragedy, we have historical. So there are different genres of theater that are set, and then they choose their preferences. And so there are some who say, no, I don't like Shakespeare. No, I prefer musical. Some prefer drama. And so looking at how we make those decisions, we set it up in advance, and then we look at the work and we pick out from that process and just looking at the videos, it's either from video or in person. So for example, if I can't show up to a particular rehearsal, if there's like a fight scene that I like, I want to incorporate that interpreter for that fight scene because I think they're a fantastic fit. And so we set up who we're choosing for the entire season. And then we go ahead and promote and have people audition. And there are some people who may not be able to show up, but then we say, okay, you know what, that's fine. You don't have to show up because we have others within the database. So we sort of set it up in terms of interpreters audition, and they set that up in advance. And there may be some interpreters who are newer, who have a newer background, they just graduated, but they really love theater. So we may invite them into a mentorship, almost like an internship, if you will. And so we'll invite them and they just have one role. They can't carry on multiple characters throughout the show. And then the other more experienced interpreters will take on more characters. And then in that process, it's great because we can provide feedback and then have them grow and develop into that role and add to the database. And there may be some companies who have their own preferences. Maybe they have interpreters who are already booked, or we can look at who the preferences are and pick based on that.
Anne.
This is Anne. Here in New York, we tend to collaborate with a lot of productions, specifically hands-on. And we're very lucky here in New York because often we had to audition interpreters. Sometimes there's new interpreters that have joined the website. And we try to grow and expand the pool of interpreters here in New York City. And we're trying to see who's out there. We're trying to feel them out. And we do have a good pool of interpreters. We have a list of interpreters that we can call on. Breath Prevor, for example, who works for Hands-On. Sometimes we go to the shows, the performance, and we just watch the performance just to get an idea of what is happening, what's the story. We have the script, we look at it, and then we kind of compare and get a feel of what is going on stage. What does the script look like? Is it comedy? Is there humor? Is there, what's the language like? We need to know all of the logistics that exist in the performance. So we also need to make sure we put in the right interpreters who represent what is exhibited on stage. Someone who can fit the character, who understands the story. If it's a comedy, we need an interpreter who's really good at just throwing jokes out there and just being super witty. That's someone that we want. As we're unpacking the script, the stage, and Shakespeare, for example, we play with the language because it's so advanced and it's a different type of interpreting that's required. Once we assign the team and there's, let's say, one interpreter who has been assigned that one character, it depends on how many characters are there. Shakespeare has like I don't know, 4 or 5 characters involved. So like Monique said, we tend to bring in a newer interpreters, younger interpreters who just got into the field to mentor them so that they get to experience what this is like. And we also want the audience to enjoy the show. So we really try to cast the right interpreters to match the quality that's being shown on stage.
Alexandria.
Yes, this is Alexandria speaking, and just tagging on to what you just said. When we're interpreting theater, sometimes we forget that it takes time. You know, it's not like we watch the show and then we say, all right, tomorrow we start interpreting. You know, it can take a month or 2 months of advanced prep. And so looking at the time and the availability of the team, who can commit to a set time, making sure that everyone's coming to the meetings, the rehearsals, making those linguistic agreements and the different dynamics, and who wants to take this and who wants to take that character. And so, you know, that timing is really important.
We've been discussing interpreters. We're talking about hearing interpreters, also deaf interpreters.
Yeah, all of them.
Everyone, yep, all of them.
Oh, and I will say, oh, Anne, would you like to, me? Yeah, you know, I want to see what you say. Go ahead.
Okay, I can do it. You know, sometimes you have an extra layer of someone who's a language expert. When you have a deaf interpreter, especially someone who's deaf, they have the ability to just fill out the language and know what the audience really needs. And sometimes it's so nice to have that extraness of an expert, of a deaf expert who understands the interpretation process. Is that something that you wanted me to talk about, Alexandria?
Something like that. Yeah, I think that's great. What I was going to mention is, in terms of the deaf aspect, from my personal experience, as well as watching others, that just the team and working together when you have hearing interpreters, if there's something that they don't get, for example, if I'm part of a team, I have to memorize everything. It's like all of my lines and you are all signing and I have to memorize the lines, I have to memorize the reactions. And so as a hearing interpreter, you can just listen what's happening on stage and you have that source happening at the same time. And so the experience, I think it's a great opportunity in terms of learning how to work in a team and knowing how to support each other in the right way. It's very exciting. It's very exhausting. It's very challenging, but it's wonderful. And with the right team in place, people who understand what the goals are and how to express and tell the story, it's really about being a vessel for sharing the message of what's being said on stage and sharing that with the audience so that they can connect and fully understand it.
I'll let Anne go. This is John. This is Anne. So just to piggyback off of Alexandria's wonderful explanation of a vessel. So there's one thing that we need to know. We have a great relationship with a lot of theaters, and they love working with interpreters. They love having deaf people on the team, and they love having them on stage and backstage and in the audience, interpreting or not interpreting. So they are willing, because they love our deaf community so much, they are willing to just work with us, to collaborate with us and just say, what do you need? Oh, we need to build a platform? Sure, let's do that. We can do that. Okay, great. We're willing to do that and work with you. And they'll just go ahead and start building an extra platform so that the interpreters can be seen clearly. Oh, so I was just thinking of a time about an interpreter, but that was actually me. Sorry about that. So like Alexandra mentioned, often when you're a part of the interpreting team as someone who's deaf, you're memorizing the lines.
So one of the issues was the deaf interpreter could not see what's happening on stage. And so what they did was they set up a monitor in front of the deaf interpreter so that they could follow along, and because it's not just the language, but looking at the reactions and the interactions between the characters. and looking at those relationships. And it's really about building that network with the hearing interpreters, the deaf interpreters, the DASL, and the theater itself.
This is John. Just by listening to your stories, I'm sweating. So I have to air out my arms. So I do think it's important to talk about the process. Sometimes we're lucky enough to get interpreters who are so easy to work with, and they're just so willing to work with one another. So when you have that, I think it's really important for a Dazzle to be extremely open-minded and understand each individual is different. There's no right, there's no wrong answers, but I think as a team, you're the director. And just like when there's a director and actors, so there's always something unique and something crazy that happens. As a Dazzle myself, based on my experience, I always learn something new, even just from my day-to-day experience. And that applies to interpreters as well. So I think it's really important for interpreters to work well with Dazzles, and it's okay to accept what you're receiving. Because we're looking at your challenges, you need to look at what your challenges are, and then we need to work together to see how we can make this all work. We're going to build upon your strength as a whole, as a team. And I think it's important that we support one another. That really helps the process work out so smoothly. I think that's something to mention.
Momo.
This is Momo. Yes, what was mentioned is absolutely true. I mean, it's true for deaf interpreters. It's different. As it was mentioned, yes, deaf interpreters have to memorize, and there's someone who's feeding. You have something called a feeder. It could be chunks or it could be one-liners. And so having that kind of interaction or that kind of dynamic is important. We also just did an experiment with the Seattle West Theater where there was a monitor with a caption throwing giving us feedback for the signs in terms of the lines, excuse me. And so we had that monitor that provided captioning, and that's a new new aspect of supporting deaf interpreters. And so there are different things that we're experimenting with. And so there are different theaters who are willing to try various ways to support interpreters. So if there are other opportunities, please go ahead and take advantage of those opportunities.
This is so tremendous. I'm just getting so excited listening to everyone. And I've been in the theater world for a long, long time, and I do love to see where it is being led at this time. Very exciting. So there's a lot of potential for Dazzles, we see. There's a great more awareness, and it is being shared within the theater community. Let's talk about some of the challenges, though, about actually getting to this level of understanding and recognition of the value of Dazzles. Let's discuss some of the challenges where we really need to start working. And we'll begin with Momo.
This is Momo. I know I've been sharing a lot, but I do need to share this. What I do find to be challenging is that some theater companies do not understand how much work a Dazzle does. So many folks think that we do a little bit and that interpreters do more than that, and that's not true. We do an equal amount of work, actually, and that's the truth. And it took years for theaters to say, oh, okay, there's more work, because they need to participate. They need to observe what we're doing. And once they did that, they realized this is more than just translating a script. We're talking about the scene. We're talking about all the other aspects. And so folks have started to say from theater companies, they have started to acknowledge and apologize, saying, okay, there's more to this than what it seems. And Alexandria had said that this is about advocacy and self-worth and all the amount of time that you're investing with the interpreters, with the theater company, with production. There's so much there. And that's a barrier that I've seen, that I've come across, but I hope to see more acceptance and embracing of the work that we do. And that's tremendous.
And John.
Yeah, this is John. Just to add to Momo, one thing I have noticed, that credibility has not been recognized. We invest so much work, we go in through the whole process, and then there's no acknowledgement on a document, nothing. We need something so that we are acknowledged, so that Dazzles are acknowledged that we were a part of this huge production.
Alexandria.
Yes, this is Alexandria. I would say I've been living and working in New York City for such a long time. I'm really thankful to Beth Prevor at Hands On, Candy, Lynette, and just they have been incredible advocates and pushing for giving credit where it's due, such as incorporating our information in the playbill. They'll have a printout to include the names of the interpreters and the individuals who are on the team. And they also work to make sure that the team is getting what they need. And so I'm so incredibly thankful to that. And it takes a lot of work, and I'm so appreciative for that. And I agree, Monique, you named it. It's about knowing our worth, but not just knowing our worth, and advocating for others as well. Because if you know that how much work you are doing yourself, and so you want to reach out to others, hey, are you getting credit? Are you getting compensated appropriately? And so helping them know what their worth is, and speaking up, and helping them to find the language to speak up, and before they just do the work and leave. Because for audience members and participants, looking at, there's ushers, there's house managers, there's the crew and backstage, and there's so many different layers to making a production work. And so it's important to compensate us, and looking at all the different layers. And it's, you have to be stubborn sometimes, and making sure that you acknowledge it, say, they're like, no, dazzles aren't really, no, it's more like an ASL coach. And it's like, no, we're not, we're going above and beyond that. And it's not about being snooty, but it's about communicating what we need, looking at the various approaches that we incorporate in making this production work. And we want to make sure that we honor that with the appropriate title, and valuing that, and making sure that we aren't just creating a ceiling for ourselves. We want to make sure that we are given the space to grow, and also making sure that we're being paid appropriately. And personally, this is just my personal opinion, I'm speaking for myself, but that's my perspective.
Yes, Momo.
And I wanted to also add on, this is Momo signing, speaking of challenges and barriers. When we're thinking about dazzles in terms of production, when I'm working with a deaf character, and there's a choreograph, when we choreograph signs and movements, I mean, it's beautiful. That's also part of working as our work as a dazzle. And so if they're moving in a space with a fellow hearing actor, then great. And when I leave and I'm no longer in the space, then who's keeping their eyes on the work? Right? So for stage managers, it would be great to have maybe a sign coach. Like when you have a dance captain, you would maybe get a signing captain, right? And I have fought for that, advocated for that, and I've been told no. And I'm thinking, no. I mean, we should let's give 30 minutes to make sure this dialogue is run through correctly. And I had to fight for that. And I had to get to the point of speaking to someone in the union. And so that's why I'm really advocating. I mean, that's why I advocated for John to become the lead principal for the Eastern Rep. So this is why it's important to really have a deaf voice in the union, in the Actors Equity Association, because this is important to have a signing captain in the handbook. And it's not just to think of a separate role, but no, let's blend that. Let's merge that role, and let's integrate that role and keep that role there and implement it. And let's anchor that. And that's the challenge now that we are still fighting for. So I wanted to mention that.
And Anne, previously you had discussed love of the theater. Oh, Alexandria, you have a comment?
Yeah, it looks like Kristen said that we needed to pause for a moment to fix a captioning issue.
Yes, I see the captioning issue, so we will pause. Thank you, Alexandria.
Yeah, sure thing.
It takes a team. Good teamwork. Momo saying.
Yeah, that's a team. You see that happening already.
Everybody is thinking.
Hi, everyone. We had to pause for 1 second to swap out captioners. Our captioner, Joe, was having some tech issues. So we have swapped over to Karen, and we will give her a second to get set up.
Sounds good. Thank you.
But we are still on, or can the audience see us?
All right, it looks like Karen is all set. So We can continue. Thank you guys for pausing.
Thank you so much.
Good job, Karen.
All right, welcome back. And I was going to discuss Anne's comment about loving theater, and clearly everyone, your passion is palatable. So what we think about what happens as deaf actors, and now the field of deaf talent in the entertainment world, that is increasing and we're having more recognition there. We want to think about having DASLs now, having more opportunities. And so there are young people who may be studying theater and still may want to be involved in the theater world, but may not be pursuing certain careers. What kind of curriculum in the theater is out there that provides specialty courses in the work of DASLs? Or is there any university that is affiliated with Deaf Studies that actually has classes in the field of the DASL expertise? Are there opportunities out there for people to study to become DASLs?
This is Anne. I think lately I've seen more and more training that exists. I think in Boston, there was about 30 students interested in learning about becoming a DASL. I think they did a pilot program on that. And there was another workshop. I believe Alexandria was involved in that with younger students who were involved in acting. Now with the pandemic, I've seen there's more workshops and more training that's being created. And they're pulling in more deaf artists, who's more involved, and who's interested in becoming a DASL. So just that new creative work that's being implemented, I see that it's being done in different ways. And I think it's growing. I've been noticing a lot that's been happening out there. Zavier, do you want to add something?
Yes, this is Zavier. Yeah, I agree. DASLs, DASLs, it is a growing field. I didn't know about it until last year. And, I didn't grow up learning about this, knowing about this. I've always loved art and fashion and, theater on Broadway, as you mentioned. That's something where, all the cast, the show that we interpreted last year, the entire cast was Black. And so my friend Dax, he was also a co-dazzle for that production, and he was willing to do it. However, he would only do it if they invited me in as a co-dazzle. And so he asked me, he said, "Hey, are you interested in being a dazzle?" And I said, "What is that?" And so he explained, he gave me a little bit more information. He explained the reason why. He said, "Well, the cast is all Black, and I felt that you would be the right person to have your opinion included here." And so I read the script, and it involved soldiers, and it was a no-brainer. My father was a Vietnam veteran, and so I had a great understanding of what it meant to be part of the military, and so I took a crash course. I had to learn on my own, but also really providing advising at the same time and so I learned everything on the fly, and that was just such a challenge. And it was incredible. It was a challenge, but it was the most fun I've ever had in my life. And it was an incredible experience. And it made me realize, you won't know you can do it until you do it, until you try. And so you try, and that's exactly what I did. And now with DASLs emerging, and this is an emerging field, and children who may be involved in theater and may love theater, but realize, what, maybe being an actor or actress isn't right for me. You don't have to be an actor to make it in this field. If you love theater, television, you can go to different middle schools or different theater schools that help develop a variety of skills, or perhaps partner with a program to develop a sort of a course, if you will, to help train students in becoming a DASL. So I think what helps is creating those partnerships. I think that's where we need to start. And that's how we really start thinking about creating the next generation of DASLs and continuing to grow that. Because I'm living proof of it because I am still learning. I'm still new, and I am learning so much as these opportunities come up.
That's terrific. Yes, Momo.
Thank you, Xavier, for bringing that up. Yes, because what's happening right now is I'm working with two other professors at the moment. One from NTID. The gentleman's name is Aaron Halstone, and another one is Peter Cook from the Columbia College of Chicago. And of course, myself, I am currently at Gallaudet University, and all three of us are working in collaboration of developing a 4-year plan. And it is a specialty training, and we are focusing on mentorship, as well as internships for students and mentorship for professionals to make sure that they transition from acting to director, to being a DASL, to being part of production, whichever part of theater they would like to participate in. And right now we are building it as we speak. And so we're looking for funding. We're looking for fundraising. And so we will have our very first short, if you will, play festival that will be happening in July, of having all four, of having folks to go ahead and participate. So folks know that you're welcome to watch and participate in July. And so what we are doing is we are building within my department at Gallaudet. We will go ahead and assess and look at all the older curriculum that may not be beneficial today and may not be exactly marketable today, and certainly may not be providing what we may need for items in the future. And so we want to look to the future and see what's coming and see what's new and how we are evolving. And we may not have that. So maybe we only have translation, but we need to expand the role of a DASL. And as we were talking about the definition of a DASL and what that incorporates. So yes, I agree. We need a program or programs that will be able to support and create space for deaf students to be professionals in the theater world and cinema, and to market these skills and to be able to enhance the field. Absolutely.
So we've got 2 more questions from me to the panel, and then we'll move to the Q&A. My first question is, the Zoom world. There was a sudden shift to virtual performances. Where do you think that's going now? John.
This is John. Up until today, I have learned a lot. And sometimes you have to embrace what you currently have. And sometimes, the world isn't perfect because of dimensions and medias. Everything changes, everything evolves, especially within Zoom. In Zoom, there's different types of, it's a different type of platform. We need to figure out what your space is, what my space looks like. Is our internet working very well? Is it high-speed internet? The technical aspect has so many layers and elements that we need to consider. And I have often found that the translation process has not been prioritized because we're so focused on the technical aspect. And what we intended originally is not the same virtually. We're making sure that our internet isn't freezing on us, our video isn't so choppy. So our translation work becomes, and it's on the back burner. Yeah, it's on the back burner. It's not prioritized. So for a week, we often tested our internet and our video quality to make sure that it works. And sometimes it just happens out of nowhere and there's a big mess up. So in the future, I honestly don't know what it will look like, but I am hoping and I'm very hopeful that we are not heavily relying on technology specifically. Because again, language is so valuable, and technology, when technology is involved, is different than working in person. And Zoom fatigue is real. Yeah, just watching the screen and just looking at people signing all day and just staring at people is exhausting physically. And I don't know if I'm speaking for everyone, but.
I absolutely echo what John is saying. This is Xavier speaking, but I have provided Dazzle advising over Zoom, and I've noticed that working over Zoom versus in person, there is a disconnect, and I don't know how to describe it. I don't know if you all feel the same way, but It's really hard for me to describe, but it doesn't work for me. I think that being in person, there is a human connection that only exists in person, and you have that exchange, and it really opens up so much more possibilities. Like you said, you're sitting in front of the laptop all day, you're exhausted, and so that human connection, it becomes deprioritized. You're worrying about your internet speed, you're making sure that you are clearly visible, you're thinking about all these different aspects, and so this is so much work you have to get through before you even get to the interpretation. And so I agree with John. I really hope that this whole technical world just goes away. I miss people. I miss people.
I miss people. You said that like 3-4 times. You absolutely do miss people. I get you, Alexandria.
People. And Alexandria is saying, yeah, having that connection with a human being is so important. That vibe, when you're in front of a laptop, it really hinders that. And so it takes it to a whole different level. And so I know that there's been a hybrid, if you will. There are some people who can come in to where the performance venue is, and we want to make that more accessible. We want to broaden that space. And so I think with technology and the way that it's been shifting, how the deaf community has adapted to that, we don't have deaf clubs like we used to have in our community. And so our spaces are looking and feeling different. And I think that applies to the theater space. And we want to incorporate the broadening of opening that space up to people who may not be able to make it in person. And so in that aspect, you're exposing people to more theater, who can observe, see theater more, and just be exposed. And, in terms of what people can afford, as opposed to physically coming into a theater venue. So I think that hybrid will be the way, but how soon that's going to happen, how soon that will be implemented, or, how well it's going to be done. It really depends on each theater venue and what their mission is and what their goal is in terms of how they broaden the audience and invite more people into their space.
I second that. This is Momo speaking. I second with what Alexandria said.
So this is Janis. We've had a great deal of comments about our vision for the future. We've already talked about hybrid spaces and thoughts for having people so that there would be no more of this Zoom world. Are there any other important insights you have for the future, what you would like to see? John mentioned about what the world would look like in 15 years and all of the technical advances that will come for sure. And are there any last comments for this panel that you'd like to share? Zavier, yes.
Yes, this is Zavier speaking. Like I said, I am new at this. I'm a new Dazzle. And when I started being involved in this world, I noticed that there aren't enough people of color Dazzles. There are not enough in this field in terms of, that was the first alarming thing that I noticed in terms of people of color, the lack of that. And for me, my commitment to the future is wanting to recruit more POC, BIPOC Dazzles who are within the Black community. There's so many Black individuals within the community who love art and theater, but where is that access? The access is not happening. And so that's where I feel that I'm coming in to help try and build that bridge, to build a connection and narrow that gap that's there, and try to bring more people in, kids who are POC, who are really interested and excited and want that access. And so for me, that's my vision, that in terms of my 5-year plan of where we might be, is really increasing the numbers of POC Dazzles.
Beautiful. That is actually a beautiful comment. Alexandria.
This is Alexandria saying thank you, Xavier. You read my mind, really recruiting more people who are people of color, and also not having to defend what we do. I think that we are always trying to explain ourselves and try to convince people that of our worth, of compensating us. And I think that, I would like it to be a day where that was just, that's a given. So that's what I hope for.
And Momo.
This is Momo signing. I also do think we need to include DASLs in production to show what our practices are in deaf productions, no matter whether or not they're deaf or hearing. We do need that. We need to have, we need to have good examples, good role models, and how it does work, so that we can spread awareness and so that folks can be more proficient in this work.
Our last comment before we move to the Q&A, John.
This is John. I'll make sure I keep it short and sweet. So just to let you know, I'm in the Actors Equity Association. I am on the council currently. My responsibility, I mean, we just discussed what we just discussed today. I am going to present this discussion to the Actors Equity Association and see what we can do to make things happen.
Oh, thank you all so much for a fantastic, inspiring panel discussion about the best practices that you have brought in, some very rich ideas about the future work for DASLs. And I would like to add in one brag, if I may. I would like to commend Hands On, because what you see is their support for this. So I'd like to commend Hands On and Art New York as well for creating this conversation and this program. So thank you to them. And now we're ready for the Q&A portion of this evening. There are many questions here, and let me check them out for one moment. So here's a question. How would a deaf individual become a DASL? It could be any deaf person or a deaf interpreter. What would be the process for them?
Anne, go ahead.
This is Anne. I mean, we could pull a Zavier and just throw you in there and make you swim for it, hope you don't drown.
We could do that.
All right, Anne.
So when I started, there was no Dazzle program. I had no idea what even a Dazzle was. I didn't even know what a CDI meant. All of that, I had no idea. I just knew that I loved theater. So when I moved to New York, I just remember seeing a lot of hearing interpreters working in theater, and I would just always provide feedback for when they were doing theater productions. And I would go and watch, and I said, ooh, okay, this is cool. This is my first experience. I mean, I know the first time I did, I probably did a very lousy job. And I had probably pages of very specific feedback and notes. And I'm sure these interpreters were like, they were so patient with me. And that's how I started. I tried it out. I knew certain people, and I reached out and I said, hey, do you mind if I just look at your work and provide feedback? If someone notices you and they like your work, and you say, hey, I love theater, I love just looking and doing script analysis, people will notice your enthusiasm for the work, and they'll see that you're so curious, and they'll just bring you along based on your interests. So look out for those people who are genuinely interested in your interest.
Momo.
This is Momo. My recommendation is, if a deaf person is interested in being a DASL, find someone who is involved in theater already, and maybe go ahead and say, just like what Anne said, go ahead and say, can I observe your work? Can I do a little bit of peer mentorship? Because that's a great way into the field. If you don't know anyone in the area or anyone who has experience, maybe mentor and shadow an interpreter who does theater work or performance work, and ask them questions to see how they are getting the characters through and the script analysis and the like. Because deaf people do have an innate ability to observe and see characters clearly in the analysis. And if they're open to feedback, then great, start that. That's a great place to start. And you need to start somewhere, and that would be a great place to get your foot in the door.
Yes, John.
Yeah, just to add to that, I want to emphasize there's no number of years of experience that justifies you becoming a DASL. There's no standard year of experience. Hey, once you've completed 5 years, you're automatically a DASL. No, it varies. It really varies. It's really important that you know yourself and look to someone as a role model, that you already see as a role model, as a hero. And once you see their work, you just dive in and work with them and collaborate and learn.
And there are so many good questions on our list. It's very difficult to be selective here. We're talking about New York City, of course, which is a very progressive space for interpreters and theater and consulting and so forth. But for those outside of New York, what organizations can we connect to find DASLs in their areas? How do we reach outside the city?
Oh, it looks like we're all stumped, Anne said.
Yes, go ahead, John.
This is John. Sorry. This is John. I have done work in Boston specifically, and I've noticed that through the interpreters who typically work in theater with different theater companies, they tend to have the connections and the network. Network is key. So I suggest if you know a friend, a peer, a family member who's involved in interpreting theater, ask them and say, hey, can I just go and watch and just see your process, and just build upon that list of people you can connect with to get you into it.
Momo.
Yes, this is Momo. You could also check in with the theater company and check in with their maybe accessibility manager, because some theater companies do have that, and asking them questions like, do you involve deaf people in your production, such as the Kennedy Center in DC. There are so many theaters in DC that would provide interpreting services, and you can. We've already established a mentorship program where DASLs can also observe. Also, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. I've been with them for 5 years for production, not for the interpreting aspect, but in pre-production, and of course, eventually working with interpreters. So that is one space that does work with DASLs. With COVID, it's been a little bit rough because of the budget and the like, but there are other theaters such as the Guthrie Theater and other theater companies in the country. So feel free to ask who their accessibility managers are. There's also somebody in Minnesota, somebody by the name of Goodman. I mean, there are various folks in different theater companies.
Great. Let me look for another question. Now, there's a question about how hearing people can then promote hiring DASLs. And they may not even be connected with the deaf community, but if they want DASLs working in the theater community or get them involved as performers as well, how can hearing individuals promote or extend this opportunity? Any advice for the hearing individuals? Any tips? Anne?
This is Anne. I know a few hearing people who have included deaf people in their production, and they were unaware that they could have a DASL be a part of the production. That idea seemed very foreign to them before, because they had no idea what that meant. And also, the hearing person was never wasn't an interpreter. They just happened to see Shakespeare in the Park or other productions, and they knew of my work. So that person would notify someone else and say, hey, there's a DASL on the team, and I think we could really benefit from having a DASL, and we should all get together and do something. The DASL would really help connect everything together, put all the acts and the characters, and deaf artists also can be involved in the DASL. We'll check in with them. So that person is such a great person, and I would bring out all the really good deaf artists, and I would also give him my idea and say, I would like to try that. And so often they were so open to that idea of having a DASL. So you just have to pitch it and make sure that you expose them to that idea.
Yes, Monique.
And this is Momo. For instance, with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, there was a director by the name of Bill Ranch.
Yes, Bill Rush.
And there was a lead role in a play that mentioned do you want to have a signing coach? And that director said, well, I don't need a signing coach. I'm a signer by the name of Howie Seago. And so the coach was saying, well, this is why I'm offering. Well, Howie was saying, well, no, I don't think I need that. And so that year he became the lead of the show, and many actors needed to sign with him. And that's where I came in. Howie had said, well, shit, now I wish I had you before this whole process started. Because it would have made his life so much easier. He was an actor, and he was also teaching other actors how to sign, and he was wearing so many different hats. And as John said, there's so much responsibility that's tagged onto a DASL, and to share that load would have been much easier. And I was careful. I was able to work with a variety of actors. But again, this is something where you can actually help to explain the significance of having a DASL in your production, and explain the reasons why and elaborate on those reasons. And it also brings in, new audience. If you want to be able to expand your Patreons, then you'll be able to expand that. To put in a deaf actor and a DASL consultant is really powerful and can help with that. They'll see that motivation, and you'll bring in community. And you also have to be careful, though. It's like trying to bring a horse before the cart, because what I recommend is work with deaf community members first. Have that conversation with them, be intentional, and say, hey, do you plan to make this accessible? Listen, deaf people from the community will be very thrilled to not only watch your show, but now you'll have a deaf audience as to participate in the conversation. I can't quite get the idiom correct, but just know that you'll know what you're doing, and it'll move more efficiently and more smoothly if you get people involved in the beginning.
And John.
This is John. This applies to everyone, I think. In my world, I mean, I wear many hats, especially as an actor. So when I hearing people discussing who don't know how to sign, and sometimes in my experience, it just so happens that my colleague will say, hey, did you get a DASL? I know one. And just by that allyship that exists, and to see the audience, the community there that's out there, please don't be afraid to bring it up originally, especially start up a conversation within the people that's in the room, create a space for that. I guarantee that they will have long-term benefits if you do that, if not for you, but for the deaf community as well.
And Momo.
Yes, this is Momo. Yes, thank you, John, for bringing that up. It makes me think of a gentleman by the name of Christopher Robinson. I see his name, yes. He is responsible working with Boston University at their, I'm trying to remember the name, it's the School of Interpreting. I'm trying to remember the name of the department. He did ask me to provide training for DASLs a couple of times within the field. There was one deaf woman who was there by the name of Kristen, who will then lead an opera performance. It's an outdoor performance. And I was her mentor. And so within that mentorship, there were 3 interpreters that were part of the process. This was an interesting project for me, because I was trying to figure out how do we set up the interpreters, because spoken Italian was being used, spoken German, as well as spoken French. Okay. And of course, English being the 4th language. And the 3 interpreters didn't know most of those languages, except one who knew German and French. And so I relied on that interpreter. And so we were trying to figure out how we are setting up the logistics. So one interpreter will it will express the story. The other interpreter will be able to express the sound and the noise, whether it be the instrumentals of the violin or the drums. And the third interpreter was going to be the soundscape of the waters crashing against the rocks and the wind going through the trees. And so what that sound looks like, if you will. And so you had the story with one, the sound and music on another interpreter, and the environmental sounds of the third interpreter. And we were experimenting, but that was the beautiful thing. Theater is about experimentation. Right? We try to meet as a community, as a team, and we have the initiative and the motivation. And that's a good start. And we have to think about that. And so when we're thinking about, once the performance was finished, well, actually during intermission, the conductor came over to me and said, those people are still here. Amazing. This is in Boston, mind you. Intermission, people tend to leave. You know why? Because they're ready to go home. But the fact that the audience was still here, I said, well, it's because of your interpreters. And I thought to them, really? I said to that conductor, really? And they said, yeah. So once the show had completed and all the answers were leaving, oh, so many people came to us and they were hearing, most of them were hearing, and they said, I had no idea that music could be so visual. And these were hearing patrons. So that was an impact too, to think about that. I mean, they kept saying, we want to come back and we want to see your work again. And I said, oh, I don't know, that depends on the opera. So, but see, the impact is great, far and wide.
Well, we need to wrap up this evening, and there are so many fabulous questions that unfortunately we were not able to get to. So with this wrap up, I'm trying to think the best way to do it. I'm going to ask quickly if each of you could just give us one word to leave with. One word.
John said impact.
Impact.
Alexandria said allyship.
Allyship.
Change, Anne says.
Change.
Partnership. This is Momo.
A partnership and? Momo, you said partnership and?
Opportunity.
And opportunity. And Zavier?
Oh man, the future.
All right, all of that. That's plenty to say. I want to thank you all. Thank you all for being with us. I want to thank our audience for participating with us. And again, I want to thank Art New York and Hands On, and Candace Brecker-Penn, and Lynette Taylor, and Beth Praver, and our interpreting team. Everyone who was involved in making this possible. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you later. So long.